Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're digging into a stack of source documents that financial professionals use, and we're looking at the hidden math of life insurance.
That's right.
Our mission for you, the listener, is to get past all that generic advice you hear, like buy 10 times your salary.
Yeah, that old rule of thumb.
We want you to understand the cold, structured calculation that determines precisely how much money is needed to replace an income. And here's the thing, that $2 million policy you might be thinking about,
Or that you might already own.
it's almost certainly not enough once real-world factors, kick in.
And that's the core of this deep dive. Because life insurance, when you look at the professional guidelines, it isn't really about death. It's about securing a best-case future for those who remain.
So we're quantifying financial risk.
We are. We're going to walk through something called the income replacement approach. It's a method that adjusts for inflation, for taxes, to get to a really precise number.
So we're treating this purely as a risk management problem. Where do you even begin an analysis like that?
It always starts by looking at a client's risk across three really crucial dimensions: probability, severity, and duration.
Okay, probability, severity, duration.
You have to map out the potential financial shock based on those three things.
And if you look at a financial risk matrix, where do some of these common risks actually fall?
Well, death, let's start there. Premature death, especially during your prime earning years, is generally a low probability event for a healthy person.
Right, you don't expect it to happen.
But if it does, the financial impact, the severity is it's huge. Now, compare that to, say, medical expenses.
Okay.
That's a high probability we all get sick, but the financial impact is usually low, assuming, of course, you have decent health coverage.
And what about disability? We see that mentioned a lot in these documents.
Disability is so critical because it lands right in that dangerous middle ground. It's often medium to high probability and definitely medium to high impact.
Why is that?
Well, unlike death, which just stops the income, disability, it stops the income and it adds a whole bunch of new costs. Specialized care, things like that. That double hit can be financially devastating.
It sounds like the analysis completely changes based on who the person is.
Oh, completely. Think about two extremes. You've got a healthy 30-year-old guy with a young family. His risk of death is low, but the financial severity for his family is astronomical.
Right.
Now, compare that to an 85-year-old single woman with no dependents. Her probability of death is high, obviously, but the financial impact is usually low. There's no income to replace.
So this matrix is always shifting throughout a person's life.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack that first factor, probability. This is the part people, they really don't like to think about. How do analysts actually calculate the odds of something so final?
We start with baseline actuarial tables. Age and gender are the first two things you look at. They're the fundamental drivers of the odds of dying before your next birthday.
And the difference is pretty stark, even when you're young.
Extremely stark. I mean, if you look at the data, the odds of a 30-year-old man dying before his next birthday are about 1 in 893.
Okay.
But if that 30-year-old were female, the odds are way lower. It's 1 in 1,961. And that statistical advantage for women, it holds true almost across the board, right up until about age 100.
But those are just the averages for the whole population. What happens when you start layering in personal history, lifestyle choices? That's where it gets interesting.
Absolutely. Those averages get modified by personal risk. Health history is the first one.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have parents, grandparents who had conditions with a strong genetic link, like diabetes or certain cancers?
That immediately raises your personal risk profile.
Significantly.
And we have a really compelling case study in our source material here. A guy named Derek, he's 47. His baseline odds are already 1 in 413. What pushes him into an even higher risk category?
Derek is a perfect example of why the tables are just a starting point. We know his father and two of his uncles were diagnosed with type 2 diabetes before they were 50. And both of those uncles died in their early 60s. That's a huge genetic red flag right there. And then on top of that, he's overweight, and he admits to smoking 10 cigarettes a day.
So that combination of family history and current habits, it has to be a massive multiplier on his personal probability of death.
It is. I mean, the agent's job isn't to be a lifestyle coach, but those factors dramatically increase his odds compared to the average 47-year-old, which makes getting the coverage amount right even more urgent.
So once you have a handle on probability, you move to the second dimension, severity.
Exactly. Now we're defining the tangible financial consequences, the actual hole that death would leave in the family's finances.
And our source material points to 5 major categories of impact, and it's way more than just the lost paycheck.
That's right. The first one is obvious. It's the loss of employment income. But the second one is often forgotten. It's the cost of replacing a caregiver.
You call it income in kind.
Right. If the person who passed away was a homemaker, the surviving spouse suddenly has to pay for childcare, cleaning, maybe even tutors. Those costs are real.
That makes perfect sense. The third is pretty straightforward. Repaying debts, mortgage, car loans. What are the last two, the ones people usually miss?
The fourth one is technical, but it is so important. It's income taxes from the,
Yeah.
well, the technical term is the deemed disposition of capital property at death.
Okay, let's pause on deemed disposition, because that's a lot of jargon. What does that actually mean?
It means that when you die, the law considers you to have sold all your big assets, like a cottage or investment portfolio, at their current market value.
Even if they aren't actually sold.
Exactly. So your estate immediately has to deal with a capital gains tax bill on all the growth of those assets. And if there isn't enough cash lying around, assets might have to be sold in a hurry to pay the government.
Wow, that could be a huge number if someone owned a family cottage they bought decades ago.
Precisely. And the fifth impact is change to future savings. The death benefit needs to be big enough to still fund the kid's education or the surviving spouse's retirement. All the things the income was supposed to do.
Let's bring this back to Derek. His lost income is $8,400 a month after tax, but his specific debts were huge. A $318,000 mortgage, a $41,000 car loan, and that looming $175,000 tax bill on the cottage.
Right. And that's nearly $540,000 in immediate cash needs, completely separate from replacing his income stream.
And if you contrast that with his wife, Becky, she's the primary caregiver. If she passed, Derek wouldn't lose a paycheck, but he'd immediately face the huge cost of replacing her unpaid work.
That expense needs to be capitalized, just like Derek's salary does.
Which brings us to the third dimension, duration. These financial needs, they don't last forever.
Correct. Most of Derek's risks have a clear end date. The mortgage will be paid off in 18 years. Child support for his son Jordan, who's 8, lasts until Jordan is 19. Spousal support for his ex-wife ends when she turns 65.
So the policy has to be structured to cover those specific timelines.
Exactly.
But that tax bill on the cottage, that's the one that just keeps on growing, isn't it?
That is the most unpredictable one. Since we don't know when he'll die, the risk is permanent. It could be 40 or 50 years. And unlike the mortgage, which goes down, the cottage's value is probably going to go up.
Meaning the eventual tax liability gets bigger and bigger over time.
It does. It demands more and more capital protection as he gets older.
Now, before we jump into the really heavy math, let's go back to that highest probability risk we talked about, disability.
Yes.
You noted that the odds of being disabled for 3 months or more are way higher than the odds of dying for almost everyone.
It is the critical risk that so many people underinsure. Because disability can be, honestly, more financially devastating than death.
How so?
You lose your income, but all your bills stay the same.
Plus, you often have new, huge costs for care, for medicine, for changing your home. If Derek suddenly gets disabled and loses that $100,000 a year income, his family is in trouble immediately.
And this sounds like a planning trap. If the client gets sick, loses their income, and can't pay their premiums anymore, they could lose their life insurance policy entirely. Exactly. Which is why financial experts build in mitigation strategies, like a waiver of premium benefit.
So what does that do?
If Derek were to become disabled, that rider would kick in and the insurance company would pay the premiums for him. The life insurance policy stays fully enforced, protecting his family from his death, even though he can't pay for it anymore.
So you're insuring the insurance policy itself.
You're hedging against the policy failing when you need it most.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, let's pivot back to the main challenge. How do we take Derek's $100,800 annual lost income and turn all this into one single dollar amount? This is where the income replacement approach comes in.
Right, so the IRA is purely focused on replacing that income, and it's built on a philosophy of what we call capital retention.
Capital retention?
The principle is that the death benefit, the lump sum, should be so large that the beneficiary can invest it, live off only the interest, and never ever touch the original principal.
So you're replicating the income stream forever.
In perpetuity, that's the ambitious goal.
Okay, so what's the simple calculation, the first number people come up with?
It's beautifully simple, which is also its flaw. Capitalized value equals the annual income divided by an assumed rate of return. So for Derek, that's $100,800, and let's assume a conservative 5% return.
Okay, so that gives you an initial need of $2,016,000, just over $2 million, which already sounds like a huge number to most people.
And this is where the simple math is so dangerous, because that number is based on just wildly simplistic assumptions.
Like what?
It assumes constant investment returns, no inflation, no taxes on the investment income, and it assumes the beneficiary is a perfect money manager who will never dip into that lump sum.
It's a fantasy number.
It's a total fantasy number for the real world.
Okay, let's start adding reality back in. Refinement A. We have to account for income taxes. Now, a lot of listeners will know that insurance proceeds are tax-free, so why do we need to worry about taxes at all?
Because the income you generate by investing that $2 million lump sum,
Yeah.
that is taxable income for the beneficiary.
Ah, I see.
So to truly replicate Derek's $100,800 after-tax income, the capital has to actually generate a gross amount that's higher, so that after the survivor pays tax on the interest, they're left with that same $100,800.
So we have to use an after-tax rate of return. If we assume the survivor pays an average tax rate of, say, 25% on their investment income.
Our effective rate of return immediately drops from 5% down to 3.7 and 5%. That 25% tax bite really hurts the capital's ability to generate income.
So what does that one little change do to Derek's total capital need?
His tax-adjusted need immediately jumps from that initial $2 million to $2,688,000.
Wow.
That one adjustment added almost $700,000, just because the survivor has to pay tax on the interest.
Okay, that is a huge jump. Now for the second, and maybe bigger, reality check, inflation. This is the real killer of the simple math.
It absolutely is. The simple math assumes that $100,800 will buy the same amount of stuff 30 years from now, which is just absurd. Your employment income usually goes up at least with inflation. Derek's $8,400 a month today would need to be over $10,000 a month in 10 years just to have the same purchasing power, assuming 2% inflation.
So you can't just use the 5% return. You have to subtract the corrosive effect of inflation to get your real rate of return.
Exactly. The logic is simple. If your investment earns 5% but inflation is 2%, your real purchasing power only grew by about 3%. When we do the actual formula, that 5% return and 2% inflation gives us an effective working rate of just 2.94%.
Down from 5% to 2.94%. That is a massive reduction.
And when we apply that new inflation-adjusted rate, Derek's required insurance jumps again, this time to $3,428,571.
That's $4 million.
But here's where it gets really sensitive, and this is the aha moment. If that inflation rate just nudges up a little bit, say to 3% instead of 2%, the effective working rate drops to 1.94%.
Which means the capital has to work so much harder. It has to be bigger.
So much bigger. If inflation is 3%, the required insurance jumps drastically to $5,195,876.
Unbelievable. We went from $2 million to over $5 million, just by acknowledging that inflation and taxes exist in the real world. Okay, let's combine them for the full picture. Refinement C, taxes, and inflation together.
This is the final and really the most accurate model under this approach. We take our after-tax return, that 3.75%, and then we adjust it downward for assumed 2% inflation.
What's the final real-world working rate of return?
The after-tax, after-inflation rate of return is now only 1.71%. That is the actual real yield the beneficiary has to work with if they want that principal to last forever.
1.71%. That is just a tiny number compared to that initial 5% we started with.
And when you capitalize Derek's $100,800 annual income using that true working rate of 1.71%, the final number required to replicate his income stream in perpetuity it balloons from that initial $2,016,000 to $5,894,737.
Almost $5.9 million. The simple math missed the mark by almost $3.9 million.
That's the entire story. The simple math suggests $2 million. But when you properly adjust for reality, for taxes, and for inflation, the capital you need to truly protect that income stream soars to nearly $5.9 million.
So this income replacement approach is clearly valuable, but it does have limits. It assumes that beneficiary is going to invest perfectly and never touch the principal.
It does. And that's a big assumption. There are other methods, like a capital liquidation approach, where you plan for the principal to be drawn down over a set number of years. That can mean a smaller initial death benefit, but it requires much tighter management.
And it's critical to remember that nearly $5.9 million is just for the income. It has to be added to the immediate capital needs we talked about earlier.
That's right. You still need to cover the mortgage, the car loan, that $175,000 tax bill on the cottage. The final policy for someone like Derek would need to be well over $6 million.
So we've shown that the hidden math is incredibly complex and it's extremely sensitive to your assumptions about the future. And we've also established that the risk of a long-term disability is significantly greater than the risk of death.
Which brings us to the final provocative thought for you to explore. If the whole goal of financial planning is to protect the family from the most likely devastating financial shock, should your strategy prioritize securing income replacement against disability before you even focus on the death benefit? Is a fundamental question of what risk you tackle first.